The first thing I noticed was the empty space on the glass door. Not broken. Not covered. Just empty. For almost 30 years, my name had been painted there in gold lettering. Robert Vale, owner. Now there was only a pale outline left behind where the sun hadn't touched the glass. I stood outside the shop longer than I should have, one hand resting on the hood of my truck, my knees still stiff from surgery. 3 weeks earlier, my daughter Lisa told me not to worry about the business while I recovered. Curtis would handle things. That was the phrase she used. Handle things. At the time, lying in a hospital bed with morphine dripping into my arm, it sounded responsible. Standing in front of that door, staring at the missing letters where my name used to be, it sounded different. The garage doors were already open. I could hear an impact wrench somewhere in the back bay. Country radio playing too loud. Someone laughing. Normal sounds. That bothered me more than silence would have. Because everything sounded normal. Too normal. Like the shop had already adjusted to existing without me. I walked inside slowly. The smell hit me immediately. Motor oil. Rubber. Burnt coffee. Degreaser. Same as always. But the front office wasn't the same. The framed photo of me and my father from the shop's opening day was gone from the wall behind reception. In its place hung a flat-screen monitor displaying weekly numbers and service packages in rotating slides. Someone had painted the office gray. Lisa always hated gray. Margaret too. They both used to say it made places feel temporary. I rested my hand against the counter and looked toward my office. The door was open. A young guy I didn't recognize was sitting at my desk wearing a company hoodie with our logo on the back. Except the logo looked different too. Cleaner. More modern. And underneath it, in smaller white lettering, were words I had never approved. Vale Automotive Group. Not Vale Auto Repair. Not my father's sign. Group. The kid looked up at me. Then he smiled politely and said, "Can I help you, sir?" Curtis spotted me before Lisa did. He came out from the service bay wiping his hands on a red shop towel, smiling too quickly, the way people smile when they're already rehearsing explanations in their head. "Bob," he said. "You should have called first. We would have cleaned things up a little." Clean things up. I looked past him toward the row of repair bays. 3 mechanics I'd known for years suddenly became very interested in their work. No one came over to shake my hand. No one said welcome back. That was unusual. Not dramatic. Just unusual. I built that shop slowly over nearly 3 decades. Most of the men working there had eaten at my house at least once. Christmas parties. Barbecues. Fishing weekends. People don't suddenly become formal around you unless they've been told something changed. Lisa came down the hallway from the parts office holding a tablet against her chest. For a second she looked genuinely happy to see me. Then I watched something else move across her face. Not guilt exactly. More like nervous calculation. "Dad," she said, kissing my cheek carefully so she wouldn't smear makeup on my jacket. "You should still be resting." I asked her why my name had been removed from the front door. There was a pause. Tiny. But long enough. Curtis answered before she did. "We updated the branding while you were away," he said. The old sign looked dated. The old sign. My father painted those letters himself in 1996. I remember because I held the ladder while he complained about the cold and smoked cigarettes he promised my mother he'd quit. I asked who approved the new logo. Curtis smiled again. "We all talked about it." We all. Interesting phrase. Because I hadn't been part of "we." Lisa stepped closer and lowered her voice slightly. "Dad, don't make this a thing right now, okay?" You just got back. That sentence stayed with me. Not. We should have asked you. Not. We're sorry. Just. Don't make this difficult. I looked around the office again. The filing cabinets were gone. My desk had been replaced by a smaller modern one near the wall. The leather chair Margaret bought me for our 20th anniversary wasn't there anymore either. I asked where my office furniture was. Lisa hesitated this time. Curtis didn't. We moved most of it into storage downstairs, he said casually. The old setup took up too much room. Old setup. That was the second time in under 3 minutes that something belonging to me had been described like a problem already solved. I nodded slowly. Then I noticed something else. The framed business license hanging behind reception no longer had my name listed alone. Underneath Robert Vale was a second metal plate. Operations Director, Curtis Holloway. I stared at it long enough that Lisa finally noticed where I was looking. We were going to talk to you about that, she said quietly. I believed her. That was probably true. They were going to talk to me eventually. After everything already became permanent. I spent the next 2 hours walking through my own business like a customer. That was the strangest part. Not that things had changed. That nobody seemed to think I should have been warned first. The waiting area had been renovated. The old coffee station was gone. So was the shelf of dusty car magazines my father refused to throw out because he claimed people liked reading while they waited. Now there were leather chairs. A self-serve espresso machine. A television mounted on the wall silently playing sports highlights. Everything looked cleaner. More expensive. Less personal. I stood near reception while 2 younger customers checked in their vehicles through an iPad system I had never seen before. Neither of them knew who I was. One of the mechanics did. Ethan. 31 years old. Started sweeping floors for me after high school. He walked over slowly, glanced once toward Curtis's office, then shook my hand. It's good to see you back, Rob. Back. Not boss. Not Mr. Vale. Just Rob. I asked him quietly how long the renovations had been happening. He rubbed the back of his neck before answering. A while. Another interesting phrase. I asked how long while meant. Maybe since spring. Spring. My surgery had been 3 weeks ago. Which meant this had started long before I was lying in a hospital bed. That realization settled into me slowly. Not like anger. More like cold water filling a basement. I asked Ethan who approved the changes. He looked uncomfortable immediately. You'd probably better talk to Lisa about that. Not Curtis. Lisa. That told me more than he intended. Around noon, Curtis invited me into what used to be my office. My nameplate was gone from the door. Inside, the room barely looked familiar. The dark wood shelves Margaret helped me install were painted matte black. My father's old radio was missing. The framed article from the local paper about our 20th anniversary in business had disappeared entirely. In the corner sat a glass desk with 2 monitors and a neon blue keyboard that looked like it belonged in a teenager's bedroom. Curtis sat down behind it comfortably. Too comfortably. He folded his hands and gave me the same expression insurance adjusters use before explaining why your coverage no longer applies. We've been trying to modernize things, he said carefully. The business needed to evolve. Evolve. Another word people use when they're describing removing something old. I asked him who we was this time. He didn't answer immediately. Then he said. Lisa and me mostly. Mostly. Interesting again. Because legally, there was no we. There was me. The business license still carried my name. The building still belonged to me. The accounts, the equipment, the land under the garage bays, all mine. But sitting there across from him, listening to him explain my own company back to me like I was a retiring employee at a farewell dinner, I realized something important. This wasn't a hostile takeover. Hostile things are loud. This had been something quieter. A gradual rewriting of reality. One small decision at a time. New branding. New systems. New authority. New language. Until eventually everyone around me started acting as if the transition had already happened. And the most dangerous part was this. I wasn't entirely sure when I had stopped noticing it. That night I couldn't sleep. Not because of the pain in my knee. Because for the first time in nearly 30 years, I was trying to remember when my own business had stopped feeling like mine. Around 2 a.m., I got out of bed and opened the laptop Lisa bought me 2 Christmases ago after telling me I was officially impossible to text. I logged into the company accounts. Or at least I tried to. My password no longer worked. I stared at the screen for a moment. Then I typed it again slowly. Incorrect password. That bothered me more than the missing sign. People change logos. People repaint offices. People convince themselves they're helping. But passwords are different. Passwords mean someone decided access needed to be controlled. I sat there in the dark guest room above the shop apartment and listened to the building settle around me. Then I called Sandra. Sandra Mitchell had been our accountant for 16 years. Careful woman. Divorced twice. Trusted no one who used the phrase, growth strategy, without showing paperwork. She answered on the third ring sounding half asleep. Robert? I apologized for the hour. She immediately asked. What happened? Interesting thing about people who've known you a long time. They can hear trouble before you explain it. I asked her when the company passwords had changed. Silence. Not long. But long enough. Then she said. You didn't authorize that? There it was. The first clean crack in the wall. I asked her who did. She hesitated before answering carefully. Curtis requested administrative restructuring access about 2 months ago. Lisa approved it electronically. 2 months. I leaned back slowly in the chair. 2 months ago, my daughter had driven me to a pre-surgery consultation in Toronto. I remember because afterward we stopped for coffee and she spent 20 minutes telling me not to stress about work while I recovered. At the time, I thought she was worried about my health. Now I wondered if she was worried about timing. Sandra kept talking. At first I barely heard her. Something about vendor contracts. Digital management systems. New financing discussions. Then one phrase cut through clearly. There was also discussion about converting the business into a corporate group structure. I asked her what that meant exactly. This time Sandra's silence lasted longer. Finally she said. Curtis believes expansion would be easier if operational control was transitioned before your full retirement. Retirement. Interesting word. Nobody had discussed retirement with me. Not seriously. I was semi-retired. I consulted less. Worked shorter hours. Took Fridays off during fishing season. But retirement implies an ending everyone agrees on. What I was beginning to understand was much uglier than that. They hadn't planned to remove me suddenly. They planned to slowly reduce me into a ceremonial figure. Founder. Legacy owner. The old man whose photo stays on the wall while younger people make the decisions. Except now even the photos were disappearing too. I thanked Sandra for the call. Before hanging up, she said something carefully. Robert, you should probably review the signature authorizations. I asked why. Another pause. Then she answered quietly. Because Curtis submitted paperwork last month listing himself as acting operations authority during your medical recovery. I looked out the dark office window toward the empty repair bays downstairs. For the first time since coming back, I stopped feeling confused. Confusion leaves once patterns become visible. And patterns were exactly what I'd spent most of my adult life studying. The next morning, I arrived at the shop before anyone else. 6:12 a.m. Still dark outside. Rain tapping lightly against the service bay doors. The building smelled the way it used to before customers and conversations filled it. Cold concrete. Motor oil. Dust. Coffee grounds from the previous day. For almost half an hour, I just walked through the place quietly. Not looking for evidence. Looking for myself. The old framed photos from company fishing trips were gone from the hallway near the break room. The wall where employees used to pin handwritten thank you cards from longtime customers had been painted over. Even the clock my father installed above Bay 3 had disappeared. That clock was older than Lisa. I finally found it downstairs in storage leaning against a stack of unopened boxes beside an old compressor we stopped using years ago. Someone had written keep or discard across the cardboard with a black marker. I stood there longer than I care to admit. Not because of the clock. Because of the handwriting. Lisa's. That hurt more than Curtis ever could have. Curtis was easy to understand. Ambitious people always believe they're improving things. But Lisa knew what those objects meant. Or at least she used to. I heard footsteps above me and closed the storage room door before anyone saw me standing there. By 8 a.m., the shop was fully running again. Phones ringing. Impact guns firing. Customers coming and going. And everywhere I looked, I saw evidence of decisions made without me. New uniforms. New pricing boards. New supplier contracts stacked beside reception. Even the invoices had changed. Vale Automotive Group. Everywhere now. Like repetition alone could make it true. Around mid-morning, an older customer named Frank walked into reception carrying keys to his Silverado. Frank had been bringing vehicles to me since 1999. He saw me standing near the coffee machine and smiled. Well, he laughed, looks like retirement didn't stick after all. I didn't answer immediately. Because something about the way he said it bothered me. I asked him what he meant. Frank looked confused. Curtis told everyone you were stepping back permanently after surgery. There it was. Not hidden anymore. Not gradual. Not subtle. A narrative. Clean. Simple. Easy for people to repeat. Old owner retires. Younger generation takes over. Normal. Reasonable. Almost respectable. And suddenly I understood why nobody looked surprised to see the new branding. Why employees had stopped calling me boss. Why my office disappeared so easily. Why vendors were already dealing directly with Curtis. Because while I was recovering, they had already been introducing the business to the world as if I were halfway gone. Frank kept talking, unaware of what was happening inside me. Honestly, he said, good for you. You earned the rest. I smiled politely. Then I took his keys from his hand the same way I had for 28 years and said, I don't remember announcing my retirement. I spent the rest of that day saying very little. That surprised Curtis. People like Curtis expect resistance to look emotional. Raised voices. Threats. Immediate confrontation. Silence makes them nervous because they can't measure it. Around noon, I asked Lisa to join me for lunch outside the shop. Not at the diner we usually used. Too public. I drove us to the small marina 10 minutes north of town where Margaret and I used to eat sandwiches in the truck during slower summers before we could afford proper vacations. The lake was gray that afternoon. Cold wind moving across the water. A few fishing boats rocking quietly near the docks. Lisa sat across from me at the picnic table pulling at the sleeve of her coat the same way she used to before high school exams. I asked her one question. When were you planning to tell me I'd retired? She looked down immediately. Not shocked. Not confused. Which told me everything. For a while she said nothing at all. Then finally. It wasn't supposed to happen like this. That sentence appears a lot when people get caught halfway through becoming someone else. I asked her what exactly this was. She rubbed both hands together slowly. Dad, you were slowing down. Not cruelly said. Honestly said. That made it worse. She told me the business had been struggling more than I realized. That newer competitors were expanding. That Curtis thought modernization was the only way to keep up. I asked why nobody discussed any of this with me directly. This time she answered quickly. Because every time we tried, you brushed it off. That one landed harder than I expected. Because there was truth in it. Not all of it. But enough. Over the last 2 years I had ignored things. Newer software. Online booking. Marketing proposals. Expansion discussions. Not because I was incapable. Because I thought stability mattered more than growth. And somewhere along the line, they had mistaken my resistance to change for weakness. Lisa stared out toward the water before speaking again. Curtis thought if the transition started while you were recovering, it would feel more natural when you came back. Transition. Such a polite word for erasing someone slowly. I asked her about the company filings. The passwords. The authority forms. The branding. She admitted Curtis handled most of it. Then she said something that finally made the entire picture clear. We didn't think you'd want to let go. Not. We thought you'd be angry. Not. We thought you'd disagree. Let go. As if the business had already emotionally stopped belonging to me. As if ownership was simply a feeling I needed help releasing. I looked out over the marina for a long time after that. Then I asked her one final question. Did you ever plan to ask me before making Curtis operational authority? Lisa's silence answered before she did. Eventually she whispered. We thought it would be easier once the paperwork was already done. There it was again. The same pattern as the missing sign. The missing office. The missing photos. Create the new reality first. Then present it as inevitable. I nodded slowly. And for the first time since returning from surgery, I stopped wondering whether I was overreacting. I wasn't. The following Monday, I met with my lawyer at 7:30 in the morning. Daniel Mercer had handled my legal affairs since 2011 after helping me through a supplier dispute that nearly cost the business one of its service contracts. Efficient man. No wasted words. The kind of lawyer who treats emotional language like a stain on paperwork. I laid everything out carefully. The operational filings. The password changes. The branding updates. The conversations with Sandra. The retirement narrative already circulating among customers and vendors. Daniel listened without interrupting once. When I finished, he removed his glasses and asked a single question. Did you authorize any transfer of ownership or executive authority? No. Good, he said simply. Then this is still your company. That sentence settled something inside me. Not emotionally. Structurally. There's comfort in structure when people around you start trying to redefine reality through repetition. Daniel spent the next hour explaining exactly what Curtis could and could not legally do. The answer turned out to be less than Curtis probably believed. Operational access was not ownership. Temporary authority during medical recovery was not succession. Branding changes were cosmetic. And most importantly, The corporate restructuring paperwork had never been finalized because it still required my direct authorization. Curtis had built a stage set. Not a transfer. Yet. That word mattered. Yet. Daniel advised me not to confront Curtis immediately. People become careless when they believe they're already winning, he said. So I waited. For 3 days, I watched quietly. I watched employees automatically bring major decisions to Curtis first. I watched vendors address him as management. I watched Lisa avoid eye contact every time someone casually referred to me as semi-retired. And I watched Curtis slowly grow more comfortable sitting in my office. By Thursday afternoon, he was using my father's old parking spot without hesitation. That finally told me he no longer saw himself as temporary. That evening, after the last mechanic left, I asked Curtis to stay behind. Rain hammered against the garage doors hard enough to rattle the glass. The shop felt different at night. Less like a business. More like a machine cooling down after being pushed too long. Curtis sat across from me in the office that used to belong to my father before it belonged to me. I noticed he kept glancing at the desk. Not nervous about me. Nervous about control. I handed him a thin folder. Inside were copies of the incomplete restructuring filings, the temporary authorization forms, and a formal legal notice revoking all operational authority effective immediately. He looked at the papers for a long time without speaking. Then finally, "You went to a lawyer." Not angry. Surprised. Like he genuinely believed this would remain a family conversation forever. I told him yes. He leaned back slowly and rubbed both hands across his face. I was trying to help grow the business. I believed him. That was the uncomfortable part. People imagine betrayal comes from hatred. Most of the time it comes from ambition mixed with justification. I asked him when he planned to tell me customers thought I had retired. He didn't answer directly. Instead he said, "You were already stepping back." There it was again. Not. "We pushed you out." You were already fading. I looked at him for a long moment before speaking. "My father built this shop in 1996, I said quietly. I spent almost 30 years keeping it alive through recessions, supply shortages, strikes, and 14-hour winters. You don't slowly erase someone from their own life and call it modernization." Curtis looked down after that. Not ashamed exactly. But aware the language no longer worked. Curtis was gone from the shop by the end of the month. Not dramatically. No shouting. No police. No slammed doors. Just paperwork, signatures, revoked access, and one quiet Friday afternoon when he cleared out the office while most of the mechanics kept their heads down and pretended not to notice. People prefer transitions when they don't have to admit what caused them. Lisa stayed longer. For a while we moved around each other carefully, like people walking across ice that hadn't fully frozen yet. Some conversations were practical. Account access. Vendor calls. Unfinished invoices. Others were harder. About trust. About fear. About why she thought replacing me slowly would hurt less than asking me directly. One night, about 6 weeks after Curtis left, she finally admitted something I think she had been avoiding even in her own head. She said, "We thought if it happened gradually, you wouldn't fight it." Not cruelly said. Honestly. That honesty cost her something. Because once spoken out loud, the truth sounded exactly like what it was. Not protection. Not help. Removal. I didn't raise my voice. I told her the worst part was never the logo or the office or even the paperwork. It was walking into my own business and realizing everyone had already adjusted to a version of the future where I no longer mattered. She cried after that. Quietly. The same way Margaret used to cry during sad movies when she didn't want anyone noticing. That nearly broke me more than the betrayal itself. Over the following months, I started putting the shop back the way I wanted it. Not backward. Just honest. The old company name returned to the sign out front. Vale Auto Repair. Simple. Plain. Enough. I moved back into my office. Hung the photograph of my father beside the door again. Brought back the old radio even though the reception was terrible and half the time it only played static between stations. The younger employees slowly started calling me boss again. Not because I demanded it. Because uncertainty had finally ended. As for Lisa, we still speak. Carefully sometimes. Normally other times. She started therapy that winter. Not because I asked her to. Because somewhere along the line she realized ambition and loyalty are not the same thing. I helped her financially once after she moved into her own apartment. Not because everything was repaired. Because she was still my daughter. But I changed the company structure completely. No temporary authority. No shared operational control. No assumptions left undocumented. People think reclaiming your life feels dramatic when it finally happens. It doesn't. Most of the time it feels quiet. Like walking into your office early in the morning before anyone else arrives. Coffee in your hand. Lights still off. Your own name back on the door where it belongs. And understanding that being slowly erased only works if you continue standing still while it happens. At what point do you think help becomes quietly replacing someone? Thank you for listening. Calm justice doesn't shout. It keeps records.